And so Descartes, who is famous for the dictum, I think, therefore I am, he's basically trying to form a kind of ontological rationalism. If I can strip down rationality to its basic tenets, then I can build up a rationality and a morality from that point forward. So he says, I think, therefore I am. If I question my existence, I must exist. And then he goes on to build on that. If I must exist, then God must exist. If God must exist, then God must be good and care about certain things in ethics. And so then he begins to develop out his own kind of ethical theory. David Hume is another example, not a Christian example, but he talks about human happiness as the rightly ordered human passions. And so, not passions like we kind of talk about them today, like feelings, but a kind of human happiness, something like what Aristotle was talking about. So the his ethics develop. How do we make laws, make rules, live a virtuous life in such a way that it promotes human happiness? Kant wasn't satisfied with that um, kind of nebulous idea of human happiness. So he wants to talk about rationality and morality grounded in a defining rule. And for him, the defining rule was a categorical imperative. Those actions which are right conform to principles one can consistently will to be principles for everyone. And those are wrong which are based upon maxims that a rational creature could not will that every person should follow. So basically, Kant's maxim is this: if you think that something is right, then everybody should be able to follow it at all times. Kind of something like the Golden Rule. This is his idea of deontological ethics. So we find a rule that will define the rightness and wrongness for us, and then we build on that rule other kinds of rules. Of course, this develops into a problem because rules come into conflict. Like the rule of do not murder and do not lie will come into conflict in the Corrie ten Boom situation when the Nazis knock on her door and ask her if she's hiding Jews. And she either has to tell a lie and violate a rule, or she has to say, I am hiding them, and then that will lead to their murder. So there are some challenges with deontological ethics. Another example in the modern and Enlightenment frame is that John Stuart Mill, and John Stuart Mill says something like this: morality is grounded in utility. What will bring the most good for the most people? This is his idea of utilitarianism. Um, and so, of course, one of the challenges to this is that it's very hard to predict what will bring good. So, we have an external frame in the ancient world based on the gods' idea, what would please the gods. This is how we live our life. And then when we get to the Jewish construct and the Christian construct, we have a theological frame for that. One God over all peoples, and how do we live in a way that reflects Christian virtue and pleases Yahweh, or reflects the teachings of Jesus. But in the advent of Christendom, these kind of how we interpret what pleases Yahweh and what pleases Jesus comes into conflict, and that conflict can lead into actual wars and actual conflict. So modernity's project was to find a different anchor to our ethics and morality, basically based in human nature. And so we talked about Descartes and Hume and Kant and Mill all searching for this, but having problems finding a particular kind of anchor. So Nietzsche comes along and he recognizes this problem, and he articulates the failure of modernity. Without an external frame, we are left with the human will to power. The strongest survive and establish their good for the rest through sheer power. And of course, we have problems with this. we're having problems with this in our culture right now, but historically we had problems with this. The eugenics movement, the Bolshevik Revolution, fascism in World War II, the Holocaust, all these things are the powerful taking their power and oppressing others in unjust ways, in immoral ways. And so as soon as World War I, World War II, and the Great Depression hit, and we come out of the backside of that, we begin to question in the West the modern and Enlightenment project. Should we actually look for a basis of ethics and morality outside of our communities, one that's universal for all people at all times and in all places, or should we try to recover morality within our communities? And so that's the advent of postmodernity. And postmodernity says something like this: rationality and morality are grounded in communal formations of the good. There is no universal rationality and morality, just localized and particularized notions of ethics and morality. So what you have with postmodernity is deconstructing this idea that there is an external frame that we have to live into. Or another way to say it is deconstructing the idea of a meta-narrative that will place a structure of morality and oppress those outside of that narrative. And what they want to do is recover minority and marginalized voices that weren't a part of the conversation. There are 3 levels of postmodernity. The first level is that there is absolutely no external frame. We're just creating reality as we go. The second level of postmodernity is that there is an external frame. There is a reality out there, but we can't know it because of our human limitations. And then the third level of postmodernity, which I think is acceptable within the Christian framework, is there is a reality out there. It's sometimes more difficult to know than what we make out it to be. And so we need to have diverse voices and marginalized voices in the conversation to help us with our limitations. That is, we need each other and the differences in our communal upbringings in order to get outside of ourselves and to see something different. Okay, one of the challenges with the postmodern project and the deconstructive project is you can only deconstruct so far. You can only take it apart and break it down into smallest pieces so far. At some point, you need to begin to build a framework. And the reason that you need to build a framework is, how do you have cross-cultural moral criticisms and moral conversations? Is there a place for that? We want to say that there is a place for that because we want to say something like, in our current conversation, racism is wrong. In our historical conversations, slavery was wrong or the Holocaust was wrong. But if you trap ethics and morality inside a specific community only, you can't have those cross-cultural conversations. And so that's one of the challenges of a radical kind of relativism that puts ethics and morality inside of a community only. So we want to say that there are some things that are morally right and some things that are morally wrong, no matter what a community affirms or denies. And so just in this brief history, what we kind of have come to understand in ethics, or one of the problems that we face in ethics, is how do we form our ethical standards in such a way that honors the way that we've grown up in our communities, the way that our communities have shaped us, and our moral formation inside of our communities. But then also, how do we have these cross-cultural or cross-communal conversations that have some moral lessons in them and some moral criticisms in them? And so we're going to take up that kind of question, this challenge of ethics being trapped inside of a community, or ethics having some standards that are outside of a community, but then who gets to act, who has access to them, and who gets to enforce those standards if we talk about them. And so we're going to take that challenge up early next week when we talk about Alistair McIntyre's definition of a tradition and how he defines a tradition to help solve this problem of, in technical ethical terms, the particular or the communal base for our ethics and the universal. Is there an ethics that applies to all people at all times in all places? I'll post the notes for both of these, our definition of ethics and these historical kind of outline of the narrative that we've inherited and the challenges that we've inherited in our ethical conversation in the modules. And then we'll pick that up, that conversation up early next week. Okay? Have a great weekend, and we'll see you early next week.